What if beauty wasn't a blessing, but a death sentence? In ancient China, women were expected to be flawless. But flawless meant broken. They crushed their feet, poisoned their skin, bled for red lips, and bound their waists until they could barely breathe. This isn't history's version of makeup tips. It's a brutal checklist of suffering, disguised as beauty. These are 10 insane beauty standards that didn't just hurt women. They killed them. And believe me, by the time we reach number 1, you'll be stunned. Starting off at number 10 is, no loud speaking aloud. In ancient China, silence wasn't a virtue, it was a rule. And for women, it wasn't just expected. It was enforced. Girls were taught from a young age that their voices should never rise above a whisper. In elite households and palace walls, a loud laugh, a firm opinion, or speaking before a man wasn't just frowned upon, it was dangerous. Imperial concubines were trained to speak softly, slowly, and only when spoken to. The ideal tone was barely audible. Any trace of assertiveness was considered disgraceful, sometimes even punishable. The reason? Obedience. Control. Submission. A woman who raised her voice was seen as unruly. One who dared speak her mind could be labeled unfit for marriage, unworthy of respect, or unwelcomed in court. It was never about grace. It was about power. And in a world where a woman's value came from how much she could endure without complaint, being quiet wasn't just elegant. It was the only way to stay safe. Coming in at number 9 is, shaved brows and painted willow arches. In ancient China, beauty wasn't just about the body, it extended to the smallest details, right down to the eyebrows. And the price? A razor. Charcoal. And sometimes, infection. Women were expected to completely shave off their natural brows. Why? Because natural wasn't elegant enough. In their place, thin curved lines were painted, shaped like willow leaves, delicate and sad. The willow symbolized obedience, softness, and fragility. And women were expected to reflect it on their faces, every single day. But behind the elegance was pain. The charcoal used for pigment could contain heavy metals. The razor, often dull or dirty. A single cut could fester. One mistake, and your beauty, your value, was ruined. Even worse, eyebrow fashion changed constantly. One decade favored long curves, the next demanded upward strokes. If your face didn't match the trend, you were outdated. Unrefined. Mocked. Eyebrows weren't just makeup. They were social survival. And women had no choice but to erase themselves, literally, just to keep up. At number 8 is, mercury-based rouge and lipstick. In ancient China, a pale face wasn't enough. It had to be animated, rosy cheeks, crimson lips, and eyes that sparkled with carefully crafted illusion. But behind the glamour was a far more disturbing truth: the colors women wore were often made from poison. Rouge and lipstick were commonly created from cinnabar, a mineral rich in mercury. The pigment was stunning, bright, bold, seductive. It made the lips look alive. It also slowly destroyed the body from the inside out. Repeated use led to mercury poisoning, tremors, muscle weakness, organ failure. But women didn't know, or weren't told. And even if they were, what choice did they have? To appear without makeup in royal courts or noble homes was unthinkable. Looking tired, dull, or natural could get you dismissed or replaced. So, they painted their faces daily, smiling with lips that numbed, flushing cheeks that throbbed under toxic heat. Beauty became a daily dose of self-harm. Each stroke of rouge a silent sacrifice. And the cruel irony: the redder your lips, the closer you might have been to death. Number 7 is, silky hair at the cost of the scalp. In ancient China, a woman's hair was more than just appearance, it was identity. Long, black, glossy strands symbolized purity, obedience, and discipline. But behind that flowing beauty was a brutal routine, one that often left the scalp damaged for life. To achieve the ideal shine, women washed their hair with boiling herbal mixtures, many of which included ash, lye, or fermented animal fats. These solutions stripped away natural oils, causing burns, itching, and sometimes open wounds. But the shine, that was non-negotiable. Some formulas included powdered minerals like alum or crushed pearls, luxurious, yes, but abrasive. Hair had to be brushed for hours until it gleamed. Tangled? Rip it out. Uneven. Cut was not an option, length mattered more than comfort. And for women in royal service, dull hair was grounds for rejection. A patchy scalp could mean disgrace. Hair loss from stress or illness wasn't forgiven, it was punished. They weren't just styling hair. They were polishing a symbol of submission, with tools that hurt and rituals that scarred. Because in a world where even a single frizzy strand could cost you your place, perfection didn't come from nature. It came from pain. Coming in at number 6 is perfumes made from musk and animal blood. In the imperial court, it wasn't enough to look beautiful. You had to smell beautiful too. But fragrance in ancient China didn't come from flowers. It came from creatures, often tortured or killed for a single drop. The most prized scent? Musk, from the glands of male deer. Extracted through agonizing methods, then mixed with oils, resins, and, at times, blood. Women applied it behind their ears, inside their robes, even between their toes. The aroma was deep, heavy, intoxicating, and deadly. Prolonged exposure to raw musk and animal-based fixatives could cause skin burns, respiratory issues, and in some cases, hallucinations. And yet, being scentless was worse. In the palace, concubines were judged by how their fragrance lingered in a room. A weak smell meant weak status. No scent. You were forgettable. Some women even ingested aromatic compounds to sweat sweetly. But inside their bodies, these poisons corroded organs. Slowly. Silently. They weren't just wearing perfume. They were wearing a warning. I'm worth remembering, even if it kills me. Halfway through our list, at number 5 is waist binding until you couldn't breathe. Before corsets ever swept through Europe, ancient Chinese women were already binding their waists tight. The goal? A fragile, willow-thin silhouette that made the body appear soft, weak, and utterly controllable. Silken sashes were wrapped tightly around the abdomen, often layered under formal robes. But this wasn't just for beauty. It was a statement of virtue, an image of delicate femininity so severe that breathing became difficult, digestion slowed, and internal organs shifted unnaturally. Young girls were trained early to tie tighter, breathe smaller. The less space they took up, the more praise they received. Over time, women developed chronic pain, rib deformities, even reproductive damage. But no one questioned it, because a narrow waist was seen as proof of refinement. A woman who couldn't run, fight, or even stand upright for too long. She was ideal. She was safe. This wasn't elegance. It was immobilization, disguised as grace. And many women, unable to loosen the bind even while pregnant, paid the ultimate price for appearing perfect. They died giving life. At number 4 is skin whitening with arsenic and lead. In ancient China, pale skin wasn't just fashionable, it was sacred. White skin meant you were rich enough to stay indoors. Noble. Untouched by labor. And for women, it meant you were pure. But to achieve that ghostly glow, women didn't just avoid the sun. They covered their faces in dangerous mixtures, many laced with white lead, arsenic, and powdered pearls. The more toxic, the better the effect. These powders clung to the skin like porcelain. They brightened the face, but also clogged pores, weakened the immune system, and slowly poisoned the blood. Women who wore them daily developed headaches, tremors, kidney damage, and even seizures. And still, they kept applying. Why? Because without pale skin, a woman was seen as lowborn, dirty, less desirable. Even one blemish could cost her a place in court or in marriage. So they powdered over the bruises, covered the sores, smiled through the rot. And in the end, many women died looking flawless, their skin shining white while everything beneath it decayed. Number 3 is graceful walking trained from age 5. In ancient China, the way a woman walked spoke louder than her words, because she wasn't allowed to speak much anyway. Elegance meant fragility. A graceful woman didn't stride, she glided. Her steps had to be short, slow, silent, with her hands tucked neatly, her gaze lowered, and her balance deliberately off-center. But this wasn't natural. It was trained. And that training began terrifyingly young. By age 5, girls were taught posture drills meant to weaken the hips, restrict stride length, and suppress natural motion. They were forced to walk with heavy headpieces or water bowls balanced on their heads. Any spill meant punishment. Girls were praised for stumbling gently, moving as if on air. If they could run or stand firm, they were told they weren't feminine enough. Over time, the body adjusted to this controlled weakness. Knees grew stiff. Ankles weakened. The spine curved unnaturally from forced submission. It wasn't about how you moved. It was about how easy you were to control. Because a woman who couldn't walk freely was a woman who wouldn't run. And in the eyes of the empire, that made her perfect. Runner-up at number 2 is foot binding, the golden lotus ideal. This wasn't just a beauty standard. It was a lifelong sentence, delivered at age 5. In ancient China, the ultimate symbol of femininity was a pair of golden lotus feet, no longer than 3 inches, perfectly arched and curled under like a delicate flower. But to get them, young girls endured a ritual so brutal it's hard to believe it was legal, let alone expected. First, the toes were broken and folded under the sole. Then the arch was crushed, and the foot wrapped tightly in silk bandages. These bindings were pulled tighter each day, forcing the bones to realign into a grotesque, unnatural shape. The pain was beyond comprehension. Infections were common. Flesh would rot. Toenails grew into the skin. Girls lost toes, even entire feet. Some died from sepsis before they turned 10. But if you survived, you were considered valuable, marriageable, beautiful. Foot binding wasn't about elegance. It was about obedience, immobility, submission. A woman with bound feet couldn't run, couldn't stand for long, and needed help to move, ensuring she remained dependent, quiet, and in place. And for nearly 1,000 years, Chinese society called this graceful. And finally, at number 1 is die beautiful or don't die at all. In ancient China, beauty didn't just define how a woman lived. It dictated how she died. For royal concubines and noblewomen, death was not an escape from expectations, it was their final performance. The body had to remain flawless in the afterlife. Pale skin preserved. Lips tinted red. Hair brushed, nails polished, cheeks touched with rouge. Even in death, women weren't allowed to decay naturally. Some were embalmed with toxic powders to freeze their beauty. Others had their limbs broken and repositioned to fit into smaller, ornate coffins, because a cramped body looked more modest. There were cases where corpses were adorned in layers of silk, jewels, and fragrance so overpowering it masked the scent of rot, for a while. But the most disturbing, some were buried alive with rulers or husbands, so their beauty could serve him for eternity. No wrinkles. No breath. Just silence and stillness, forever. In the end, they weren't remembered for their minds, their voices, or their lives. Only for how lovely their bodies looked once they were gone. Because in a world ruled by appearance, death was the last chance to be perfect. They called it beauty. But it was silence, pain, poison, and control, dressed in silk and powdered in white. For centuries, women were broken to fit a shape that was never theirs. They were bent, bound, reshaped, erased. All to satisfy a vision of perfection that never once asked if they wanted it. These weren't just beauty standards. They were tools designed to shrink, soften, and silence half the population. And though the powders have faded and the bindings are gone, one question still lingers. How much of our idea of beauty is still built on suffering?